Okay, so here we go. Oh, wait, you know what? What episode are we?
Your voice has changed. I'm joking.
We're episode 29. Oh my God. Okay, here we go. Well, being an athlete was my life, and actually, it eventually became part of my job. But I always felt I had a kinship with musicians who, very similar to athletes, train and practice hours at a time to the point of exhaustion, just trying to perfect their skill. And for an athlete, it could be looking for that championship trophy or that Olympic glory. And I think for a musician, it could be looking for that chart topper or for that recording contract, or even maybe to be able to make the orchestra, make the team. And so you have these individuals that come together either to make this team or to make this orchestra. And it's all about taking these unique skills and building it into one awesome, fantastic team. And on a sideline, you have the coach who's calling the shots and who's making the decisions. And then with the orchestra, you have the conductor. And so that brings me to our guest today. It is wonderful to be able to welcome a world-renowned conductor and the musical director of Canada's National Arts Centre Orchestra, Alexander Shelley. It's so great to be chatting again.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. This is episode 29 of Living Your Life with Leanne Lang, the podcast brought to you by Extension Marketing. And for more information, as always, you can head to extensionmarketing.com. Alexander, you're here. I'm like thinking Zoe's going to call you at any second to say that she's gone into labor. You're expecting any second, like in the next week or so at this point. Yeah.
In the next week or two, it could happen. Who knows? But she's in great health, and she's very excited about it. I think she's reached that stage that, as far as I can understand, a lot of soon-to-be mothers reach the very end of pregnancy where it's like, this is enough already.
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah. He needs to be out now.
Yeah,
so,
you're done.
Yeah.
I've been following her actually, and you said as you came in, I had Zoe on.
Oh,
she
you
was
did.
one of my first guests, and I love her. And I still have people coming up to me and saying, "Oh my God, that was such a cool story about Wonder Woman and the Amazon."
I loved the conversation you had. We listened to it the week it came out while we were driving to Montreal, actually, Zoe and I. And I said, "Can we listen to it? I really want to hear it." She said, "Oh, yeah." Anyway, we put it on, and I just found it fascinating. Even being married to her and knowing her, but hearing the two of you talk and sharing, you as an athlete, her having trained for Wonder Woman in that way, hearing you two. Compare your experiences. I found it fascinating.
Yeah, I thought her story was amazing. And also just her background, into music and how she trained and just how it all evolved. And I thought that was really interesting when we came into this podcast is when the premise of the podcast really is health and wellness and lifestyle and people's stories. But I really felt when I was looking at what it is that you do and how people relate to it, athletes, musicians, it becomes a lifelong passion. It's something that's created young and trained very young.
Well, I agree. And, listening to that conversation that you had with Zoe and thinking, I've loved sports all my life and thinking about what's involved in becoming a professional musician, also finding fulfillment in the life as a professional musician. It's the kind of breadth that you also need in so many other walks of life. It's not just taking care of yourself physically, and of course music is all about physicality. Sometimes it's very fine motoric stuff, if you're playing a flute or a piccolo or something that's very small. Piano, you have to think about your musculature in your shoulders, your back, your arms. You have to be hyper aware of every detail and every nuance, because pianists for 40 minutes will be using all 10 fingers independently and remembering swathes and swathes, tens of thousands of notes that they're reproducing. And every tiny difference in weighting in a single finger is the difference between right or wrong, between a phrase sounding great or not. But beyond that, and it's the same for all instruments and the same for a conductor as well, the physicality, but beyond that, you're looking for the kind of why of what you're doing. So it opens also these doors to the question of why do we all communicate? What is it about music that's compelling for an audience? What is it about watching a Sens game that is so compelling for the people watching? It's not just that they love hockey. It represents something else. It represents something quite fundamental in who we all are. This idea of team, this idea of individual excellence, this idea of combat, but at the service also of entertainment and stuff. So there's a whole load of themes that are similar.
There really are, and what people get out of it. And I find at so many different times music can be incredibly healing or inspirational or create this this feeling within you that
Absolutely.
either can inspire or sadden. I mean, there's so many ways to look at this. And you talk about the fundamentals of it. And so let's go back because that's genetically,
Right.
it's ingrained in you. I mean, you are bred from music and
That's right.
pianists as parents. Like, take us through kind of the upbringing for you, because
Okay.
you were born into this life.
I think probably like anybody, you take what you're born into for granted, and then when you look back, you realize there may have been elements that were unusual for other people. But in our home, my parents' house, when I was born, there were 5 grand pianos. So that's weird already. I know that now. Back then, it didn't seem weird. It just seemed that Dad and Mum sat at these big instruments all day and practiced.
But there weren't 2; there were 5.
There were 5. So and there was one on the ground floor. My parents have a fairly large house in the north of London. There's one on the ground floor, one on the second floor, and on the top floor, there were 3 grand pianos. One that my mother used on her own to practice. Then there was a room separating her room from my father's studio, and he had 2 concert grand pianos. These are 11 foot long Steinways. That were end to end. So he would practice on one. But the thing is, at that part of my life, when I was a little baby, my parents also played concerts as a 2-piano team. So Dad would be playing as a soloist with orchestras or recitals, which is a concert on your own as a pianist. But they also did concerts with orchestras or as a duo on 2 pianos. There's a lot of repertoire for that. So either they'd be practicing separately or they'd be in the same room playing. And I used to, as I then learned to crawl and sort of the beginnings of walking, it used to be one of the games I loved doing, which was go upstairs to my dad's studio, push open the door, imagining he didn't know I was coming in. And of course he saw the door opening, but I would crawl under the piano while he was playing. And then I'd surprise him by grabbing his legs. But of course it wasn't a surprise. But that something I'm thinking about now as we're about to have a baby is, the resonance of the instruments was completely part of my time in the womb. My mother was practicing up against the piano, and of course the resonance was just bombarding me as a little fetus. And then in the first few years of my life, I think every night I went to sleep, I would hear from upstairs my parents practicing. So I sometimes say music was my first language, but I really mean that. It sounds a terribly sort of,
Well, it doesn't.
strange thing to say, but
It makes so much sense. I have noticed, because I mean I follow you and Zoe, but you have been doing that. There's a sense of music. I mean, I know that there's microphones and music playing, and you want that also for your son, to be able to have that first exposure.
Yeah, I've written a little song that is it's really sweet that we play for him. Like it's about him being it's terrible. I mean, the text is like for a child, but it's
Have
cute.
you read most children's books? Trust me, you'll see how some of the text
But we
can
play
be.
it to him and stuff. But no, those early weeks and months of my life anyway, the music was there, and it carried on like that. That my parents were traveling a lot, which is also going to be part of our lives, and I traveled a lot with them. And again, it seemed like the sort of it just seemed normal at that stage. I realize now, looking back, that was fairly unusual, and for me, it was incredible to travel like that. Again, looking back, to be in the first few years of my life in so many different countries, and when you're a musician, you work with a lot of people. I stand in front of 70 different people every week in a different city somewhere. So as a young person following along, you get a very interesting impression of the world. It's through a particular lens, of course, but there was all of that in my youth, and then of course the training started to come in. So before I could speak, I started to hit notes on the piano. Yeah.
You were, when you would be a child, kind of on the sidelines, watching from backstage, let's say, were you drawn to watching your parents on stage, or were you looking towards the percussion section or the trumpet? Or were you still watching it, what they were doing?
It's a very interesting question. My strongest recollections from when I was a little kid are of watching my dad. Of seeing him on stage and remembering watching him very carefully. There's particularly when you have a piano soloist in front of a big orchestra, big piano concerto. There is something, I think it's one of the reasons also audiences love those pieces, there's something deeply heroic about it. there's this one guy or woman on an instrument battling away against this huge orchestra. And I think every child idolizes their parents, and it was very easy to idolize my parents in that situation because they did look like kind of heroes.
Well, and did they command were they different? Could you see the difference with how they practiced and then what persona they carried onto the stage? Like, did you see that there was a difference between what you experienced in your home and what you were experiencing watching them on stage?
Well, actually, I have to say both my parents are very sort of straight up, genuine sort of people who
are they down to earth?
They're very down to earth, yeah. I mean, in their way, everybody, I'm sure there are people who meet them and say, well, how down to earth can you be doing what you do?
Yes.
But Dad and Mum would not change at all walking on stage. And actually, I think that was a very interesting lesson for me. One of the interesting aspects of talking about that time in my early sort of formative life is asking myself how much of the way I am now was sort of instilled in me then. And everybody has to find their way of being a performer, whether it's presenting a show, whether it's performing as a sports person, whether it's a musician or a politician or whatever, going at the office and doing your job well. But particularly with performing in any way, you have the option, and sometimes it's very necessary for people to say, I have my private persona, but I also kind of adopt a public persona, and there's nothing wrong with that. Interestingly, though, I when I perform, I feel very relaxed up to the minute I go on stage. I can very quickly focus, so it takes me 10 seconds, literally, just to get in the zone for going on stage. And I feel very comfortable out there. I always have, and I think a lot of that was just because I was used to seeing it when I was younger. That's not to say that my parents didn't grapple with challenges. I mean, being a concert pianist is an incredibly difficult lifestyle. I think that being a conductor has very different challenges, but the moment of performance is easier than if you are a solo violinist or a solo pianist or a soloist standing in front of an orchestra. Because for a conductor, a lot of the work is done in the rehearsal period. You're forging a relationship of trust and belief with the group of musicians. And because, by virtue of the fact that when you're conducting an orchestra, the movements are bigger and less precise than if you're playing a piano, obviously. And the immediate implications of tiny changes in nuance aren't quite the same as a piano. So the sort of stress element is a very different one for a conductor. And yet, when I observed my dad as a young man, and when I observed my mum performing, they seemed very natural. And I think, you're conditioned by that. I think I just felt, I think it just became part of me. And I'm very grateful for that, because I could have had neurotic parents who made me neurotic when I performed. It could have been, Well,
I might think with any life experience, our upbringing and what we're exposed to really kind of shapes, especially as you're mentioning in those formative, what happens. I'm going to get back to what life is like as a conductor, because I find I've learned a lot as to exactly what it is that you do that I think people aren't familiar with. And so I'll hit on that. But I want to hit on first. So we're growing up in this household. You start to hit keys at a very young age. At what point did you or your parents and those around you realize that you yourself had your own unique talents and that you were going to be, sitting at a at a piano very, very similar to them, practicing hours on end? And it was also the cello.
The cello became my main instrument, yeah. So my grandmother was a cellist. She taught the cello. She was a teacher at a school. And taught other things as well, but music was her sort of her forte, if you excuse the pun. And she taught me the she
in the music, yeah, got it. Yeah.
She taught me the cello, and because it was there when I went to visit her, it was under her piano. She played the piano as well, and I always wanted to sort of play with it and touch it. And you have to get to a certain size to play the cello because it's a bigger instrument. But you know what? I think, again, because my parents were in the industry, they knew that talent, a gift for playing an instrument or for music, was by no means a guarantee that was your profession. So they were actually very, very laid back about the whole thing. They were actually sort of adamant that I would go and have actually a very serious academic education, rather than a very serious musical education, because I got the music at home, and they taught me a lot about practice. My mother taught me all the sort of background stuff in music that listeners may not be aware of, but harmony and counterpoint and oral tests and things like that. So the analysis of music, all the sort of bread and butter about reading music, and we have lots of different clefs. So the way music's written is, there's lots of different ways to read it. She taught me all of that stuff at home. They talked to me about practice and how to be good at it and what's involved in it. But they also knew that the drive had to come from me.
Mm-hmm.
So they would get angry if I hadn't done my certain number of hours, because they were, I think, thinking more as parents rather than musicians. They were thinking you just have to learn also to be disciplined in one way or another. But they never held back from saying to me, listen, we want you to do this because it's part of growing up, is learning how to work concentratedly for an hour or two. But if you can't, then that's your choice. We're not going to make you long term sit at a cello for hours and sit at a piano for hours. You have to want it.
What was the day like? I mean, it was school. How many hours a day would you be practicing?
Oh, this is a good question, Lord. So I reckon from probably when I was 5 or 6,
Mm-hmm.
7, I don't know, I was doing at least a couple of hours a day
Mm-hmm.
on different instruments, and that continued all the way through my life. And there would be periods then when you up that 3, 4 hours. I was never one. I am now. So as a conductor, and this is interesting. I really found my passion in the sense of something that if I was not paid, well, don't tell anyone at the NAC that, but if I was not paid, I would still do it. But I could study scores, which is the sort of main life of a conductor behind the scenes. I could do it 15 hours a day and feel like no time had passed at all. Whereas when I was practicing the piano and the cello, I would be aware that time was passing. Let's say that I had a natural.
It was like,
gift.
if I get this done one more time, let's play this through one more time. That'll kind of get
because
to the end
of
practice.
And I loved school. I loved learning about things.
Yeah.
I also loved sports. I played a lot of tennis,
What did you play?
a lot of soccer, a lot of cricket because I'm English.
Yeah.
But I loved running. I always loved athletics. So for me, a lot of my youth, when I think back on it, was juggling lots of different things. But my days were very full. And to this day, if I'm not studying scores, I will. Or if I'm not with Zoe and we tend to do things. We love to go for a walk.
Yeah.
We love to go and
You guys
visit
are
things.
very active.
And
I look at this, I mean, from my background, I was training 4 hours a day
Right.
as a young gymnast, right?
Yeah.
And so it was, I did that every
Yeah.
day. And so I see that it was very similar. You come home from school and
Yeah.
it was sitting at the piano or sitting with the cello and you had a couple hours to go.
Exactly.
And it's funny that you found your refuge. It was kind of like I needed to still be able to go play soccer.
Yep.
And with my mom, she still made me play. I had piano lessons.
Funny.
So
we're like the
it was
same, but yeah.
it was almost like to be able to be exposed
Yeah.
that I was using different aspects, and
Yeah.
and the only time we could fit it in was Wednesdays, in the middle of my lunch break, was getting into my piano
Yeah.
lessons. But to be able to have that exposure, that it needed to be well-rounded, right?
Yeah.
That you were still able to be active and to do all of that. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking as you're running, are you like, I need music?
Mm.
Like, are you playing concerts? Are you playing like what's in your head as you're doing all of these
When
things?
I run nowadays, and this has been my routine for 15 years now. God, I'm old. Like 20 years now, it's been my routine. That I will spend the day studying. This is if I'm, at home, preparing for going away to perform or rehearse. I will spend the day studying scores, and I will often then listen to a recording of the piece or pieces that I've been studying while I'm running.
While you're running.
And a lot of the thoughts, the sort of cerebral elements that I'd been thinking about all day would just sort of connect with the music as I listen to it, and it distracts me completely from the
it gets you
running.
through the run. You get from A to B, and you've had that. As you're growing up then, and so you're playing, you have the piano and you have the cello. You were winning awards, and you were noticed early.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were one of the youngest to be able to win a number of awards. And I could look at them. I have them written down. But in your life, the accolades are insane. when was the shift then to knowing that you could sit there and read scores and that the conducting aspect and not necessarily being a part of this orchestra or playing was where you wanted to go?
Well, I think it was actually very young. If you think about what a conductor does, then it's quite weird if you're 13 and 14 to be thinking about wanting to do that. And that's the age for me that it really became, I'm very interested in doing this. And my dad and my mum, when we were talking about the sort of strategy for my education, because it became clear to me I want to be a musician around the same age, as in I definitely want to become a musician. It had always been, they'd left it particularly open. They'd said, go to school, see what interests you, see what draws you, which was very pragmatic of them. I think it was a great thing to do, because then when I came to make the decision, it felt like me saying, I want to become a musician, Mum and
it's
Dad.
very difficult as parents.
Right.
Knowing their lifestyle, knowing how talented you are,
right.
Like to step back and allow it so that it was going to be you feeling that you had made this decision on your own.
I already feel it for our little boy who's going to be born in the next few weeks. I know I shouldn't put any pressure on him, but I'm going to be training the shit out of him. Musically, I'm going to make sure that he's ninja at everything.
And then you pray that love is born within them, and that they say to you, no, Dad, I want to do this because I want to do it.
If he wants to. Yeah. But sorry, to get back to your question in a second, one of the things I wanted to emphasize about the practice, because you had the 4 hours a day training, and I had a similar amount all those years. It was actually my father who, at one point during my teenage years, when I was being a bit kind of, I don't want to practice that much and I want to do other stuff, he said to me, well, listen, I can't tell you that you have to do a certain number of hours, because it's not about the certain number of hours. It's about being focused when you do it. And that is, it sounds like a very obvious thing to say, but I'm very aware that it's an interesting toss-up for parents when they're asking their kids to do anything, practice anything, is that just doing a thing for a certain number of hours doesn't mean you're going to get better at it. It's how you do that thing. It's how you train. And if a kid ideally is focused, even if it's for 15 minutes, but really focuses and really trains something consciously and carefully, that's way better than an hour of just kind of being in a room with an instrument, or roughly kind of... and that is such a fundamental aspect of what comes later. It's not just about the hours, but of course you can't do it without the hours.
Right, you can't do it without the repetition, but the repetition of being focused on exactly what it is that you're doing goes much further.
Because you can repeat mistakes a lot.
That's it.
And if you do something 10 times, get it right twice, you've actually practiced getting it wrong more than you have getting it right.
I think one of my coaches was always like, perfect practice makes perfect. It was
exactly.
It didn't matter that I did 10 routines if the two mattered.
Exactly.
And so it's interesting, and I think it's the same. Are you like that even now if you've been with an orchestra and you've done it right? Well, that you don't feel the necessity. Let's repeat this 3 more times when the focus is.
So that's. It's interesting we're talking about it, because it becomes clear to me actually that it's very fundamental to me in rehearsal. If a mistake is made once, that's fine. We all make mistakes once, and the second time it would be something that we would then as a group talk about and correct. But if it persists, I have this bit of me that gets quite annoyed, to put it frankly, and that's not because of any individuals. It would be often to do with a group dynamic. And the orchestras that I love working with, which includes, of course, the National Arts Centre Orchestra, above all, are the groups that have that kind of discipline, where we all understand mistakes can be made, but they're eradicated quickly because that focus is there. It's that like you need as an individual saying, right, I've just played that scale, or I've just done that. Give me an example of a gymnastic move. What would there be? A flip.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just done it twice wrong. I'm not going to carry on doing it wrong, because then I'm just training myself to do it wrong. And it's the same in an orchestra, it's the same for an individual. But anyway, sorry, I digressed.
You know what? In sports too, sometimes there's a fear of failure, fear of doing something. Was there ever that going, that fear of being on stage, people, they freeze, or that you could have that talent and be able to practice it and be focused? And then have you seen people go through that where they get onto the stage and there's stage fright, and that they can't correlate what they've practiced to being able to perform it?
I mean, I've seen it, and one sees it a lot. And there are also stories of some of the greatest performers who were terrified to go on stage. That's then a personality thing, and a lot of stuff will be rooted again in childhood experiences and expectations and pressures. I think on a sort of practical level, if you're experiencing those things, the first port of call would be how do you prepare? Is there an elephant in the room mentally, psychologically, that you're kind of skirting around? You're pretending it's not there. Does it need dealing with? And frankly, I think, as with sports people, as with anyone, if something persists, and it becomes clear to you it is a psychological issue, I think there are very good people out there who help train the brain, because oftentimes it's not just about how much practice you put in or how talented you are, but it's also overcoming certain issues in your personality, which mean that when you get on stage, you may have trouble performing. And I think in music, you're naked on stage, with the degree of what is expected from you as a great performer. You're very naked, and it's important to be frank with yourself and say, if I want to do this, what do I need to change about myself? And it's wonderfully exciting in a way.
Did you love being on stage? Like, did you get that excitement, like that competitive edge when you were going out? Like, did you thrive on it?
Well, I do now, and I have done it. Conducting is my. I just found the thing that is right for me, psychologically as well. As a cellist, as a pianist, I never took the piano as seriously as I did the cello. I really performed a lot as a cellist, and it was a lot during my mid to late teenage years, because after that I really focused on conducting. A difficult time in any young man's life, and I was like any teenager, was it cool to be doing what you were doing? It was your world. I don't know if it was cool or not. I was at a school where there were a lot of different personalities, and people were actually, when I look back, very open-minded about it. I mean, I was also, I think the North American term would be jock. I wasn't a jock per se, but I was on all the teams and stuff, which helped. I guess if I'd been kind of...
Just band camp.
Yeah, just band camp, maybe my life would have been different. I never felt in any way... I actually felt very proud of what I did, and people seemed to sort of respect it. I performed a lot of concerts and stuff. But no, the where were we? The aspect of it was the cello and the
but I was like that you thrived on stage, and then you said so as a conductor, yes, but you were saying as a cellist.
No, sorry, that was it. As a cellist, I know it was related absolutely to how much I'd really focused when I was practicing, and I definitely had performances where I was more jittery, and I knew going on stage this is going to be hard for me to play as well as I want to, and then I would be nervous, and I remember that feeling. I remember hating it, because I had not sort of grown up with a feeling of any apprehension going on stage at all, and that was a lesson for me. I mean, I think I was well armed through my parents to be analytical and to understand if you're experiencing nerves like that, it's because you have skipped a step in the preparation, and I knew that, and so the great thing is, though, I found this métier where I honestly, if there were 50 hours in the day, I would work all of them because I love it so much.
I think that relates for a lot of people, whether it's being prepared to go into a business meeting or being prepared, it's the preparation.
Absolutely.
If you feel prepared, the feeling of walking in and doing this, once you've done it, that it makes so much sense.
Absolutely.
So you go from the time of your youth of playing, and then really having this discussion with your parents saying, I feel this passion towards the conducting aspect and the studying and the understanding of music. Can you take us through exactly what it is when you say a conductor.
Right.
And I don't know right now. This is in podcast form. For those of you that are watching, you can see what Alexander looks like. When you think of a conductor, and maybe some of you have been sitting this whole time thinking, oh my God, this is an older gentleman with really silver hair who's just going to get dressed in a tuxedo and wave a baton. And I think that is the perception that most people have when we think of a conductor.
Right.
It's not insulting you, I hope,
No,
at this point.
It's fine.
We don't seem to think of the conductor as...
the younger guy.
It's just, the younger guy, I mean, we just know that we know that the spotlight comes on the conductor at the start of a performance. And that's pretty much that's all we're really thinking about is like, yeah, they're here, we clap, and here comes the show. So what is it exactly that you're doing? Like, what is the role, what is the job of a conductor? I see the coach on the sidelines.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Okay, so the role of a conductor is manifold. Let's just talk a little bit about the history of why conductors exist. So for many centuries, people would perform music without a conductor. They would be playing in smaller groups or they'd be in larger groups, but the music, it wasn't of a nature where you needed an outside person to kind of help interpret or keep time or anything. You'd have, let's say, the first violinist, he would lead and people would follow his body language or her body language, or a woodwind player would lead or whatever. You know, you'd have an individual within the ensemble would sort of take the reins. And that carried on for a pretty long time. Then the mid-18th century, because music became a little bit more complex, the orchestra started to get a little bit bigger. It became necessary for somebody to stand up the front, and at that time they had like a staff, like a wizard, like Gandalf, maybe a little smaller. And they would sort of beat time like a military band nowadays. They would sort of move time. And in fact, one of the earliest well-known conductors was a guy called Jean-Baptiste Lully, and he had a fairly long staff, and he managed to stab himself in the foot, and he got gangrene and died from it. So that was not a strong start to the profession. But anyway, then it developed, and there were composers like Mendelssohn, who was very well known, and then moving on into Berlioz and Wagner, who became proponents of the art of conducting. And so let me talk about what it is. Well, because it has developed over the years.
Right.
But nowadays, I need, firstly, to prepare the music. Now, that could be a piece that was written 500 years ago, 200 years ago. It could be a piece that was written last week and is a brand new piece of music. And when I say prepare, that means that, let's say there are 60, 70 musicians. Let's say there are 12. There's going to be about 30, 40 lines of music going on at the same time, 40 voices. What I do is I prepare the piece by analyzing it, understanding what's happening in the harmony, in the rhythm, in what we call the orchestration. So that's, if you imagine singing Frère Jacques or something, is it one voice singing Frère Jacques, or is it two voices? Is that a soprano voice and a bass voice plus a flute?
But would you know that based on what the...
It's printed in there. It's printed in the score, so who's doing what where.
Right.
And
that's based on the composer.
That's the composer who wrote that. So what I'm doing is basically analyzing all the composer's intentions. I'm saying, what is the composer doing here in terms of craftsmanship? That's the first line. The second level of understanding the score is saying, okay, what is all this craftsmanship trying to express? Try to get to the root of what a piece is trying to say to an audience, trying to say to us. Now, sometimes that's a story. Sometimes you see at the beginning of a score that there's a poem, and the composer is setting this poem to music, adding a layer of interpretation. Sometimes it's something abstract like a symphony, and we could talk for 2 hours about what a symphony is, but there are lots of different forms, and I try and get into that. And so when I get to the first rehearsal, I have ideally the maximum amount of information possible swimming around my head that has to do with this piece. And then it depends on what orchestra I'm standing in front of. An analogy I like to use is that a conductor is both the mechanic for the car and the driver in the race. So rehearsals will oftentimes be, in the first rehearsal, we'll take a drive around the track, first of all. We'll play the piece through once.
See how the car's running.
Yeah, see how the car's running. And of course, remember, the car also has a brain in this. So the analogy starts to get a bit weird because musicians are very, very, in an orchestra, they're actively involved when they're playing. They'll listen to what's happening. They'll
Right.
also start to.
But you're also dealing with the best musicians
Yeah.
in the world, right?
Yeah.
These individuals have also done their hours and preparation, and they're the best of the best that you're dealing with.
So what you have then is the car. You've gone around the track once. You played the piece through. You get back to the pit, and then you start to just work a little bit on the tires, the brakes, the engine, the oil. You just maybe take off a wing and put a different one on. But
what if that tire doesn't want to be tweaked, or
what
if they don't want more air in there?
But this is the thing. You have you have not only the tire will potentially say, "Excuse me, I thought I was great on the run round,"
right?
But the rest of the car might also say, "Well, we thought the tire was pretty good. What are you doing with the tire?" So the thing is, this is why you prepare so much. You have to. There has to be plausibility behind everything you say. So
at the end of the day, are you the boss? This podcast is brought to you by Extension Marketing. They are a new breed of marketing agency that acts as your virtual marketing department, designing and implementing cost-effective marketing strategies that will grow your business. I can speak to this personally, as I've been using the Extension Marketing team to help me launch and grow my business. Founder Pat Whalen has been a lifesaver for me, a genuine coach, guiding me along the way into uncharted territory. Tell them you're a friend of the show and receive a free 1-hour consultation. Check them out at extensionmarketing.com.
At the end of the day, yes.
At the end of the day, if you are kind of tweaking the tires and everything.
At the end of the day, yes.
Okay.
But of course, the whole process is so much more powerful if everybody is actively involved. So and this is why conducting, a lot of it is about building a basis of trust and respect and mutual respect. It is so fundamental. Now, you could have trust and mutual respect and you could act like a dictator. That is possible. If you're so convincing in everything you say and it's so right that people have no choice but to say, you know what, we really believe in him or her as a conductor, then you'd have that trust and respect. You can also find a way then, because I was going to add the next level is you're driving around the track together. You've got the race together, which is the performance, where actually you need to have a very you need to have a symbiotic relationship. It's a psychological, emotional relationship with the players to get the best out of it.
Can you tell if you're standing up there? Can you tell when you're looking at your orchestra if second violinist isn't feeling quite right that day, or your trumpet player is they just don't have the wind in them that day? Like, are you able to? You can tell.
And that's one of the interesting things, because we as a before I get back to my extended analogy, I think it's very exciting. As a conductor, you have two different lives. You have the life as a music director, the sort of permanent conductor of an orchestra, as with the National Arts Centre Orchestra here, where you will do something, on average around the world, between 8 and 20 weeks a year, depending on your contract, how that orchestra works. I do 17 weeks here in Ottawa with the orchestra. And when you're not with that orchestra, you're somewhere else in the world as a guest conductor for a week. So that's like having a coach go for a week to coach the Sens or the Maple Leafs. It's kind of unusual, but it's what we do. And so that is a different ball game. Because sometimes you're turning up to a group, a team, if you will, an orchestra in this case, that you've never worked with before. So you don't immediately know, the trumpeter's having an off day. I don't need to talk about X, Y, or Z with them because they're normally great. This is not an issue. You have to work that out on the fly to begin with, which is why oftentimes, here with my orchestra, in the first rehearsal, we can dive straight into stuff. We can really, get into the nitty-gritty immediately. If I'm with an orchestra for the very first time, sometimes I just leave off certain elements of detail. There'd be specific things until I've worked out, what their rhythm is, whether on the second day, maybe the orchestra takes a huge leap up. But a huge amount of what a conductor does in that context and otherwise is understanding and empathizing and managing people, because the capacity within an orchestra, when you think about each and every one of these people has their 10,000 hours way behind them. They've done that. They're masters at their instrument. like I can think of in few other professions other than sports, where you are working in real time with 70 people who are masters of their trade. It's the most wonderful thing. If you can release that capacity, if you can allow everybody to give their best, then you have something which is frankly in our day-to-day lives unparalleled. You have 70 masters performing together in real time, listening to each other, reacting to one another, empathizing, communicating. It's really quite extraordinary.
Are there times when I can feel emotionally the power of what it is, like that you are on this stage and feeling it, and then realizing this full house of this opera house behind you is moved? So, like, are there nights when you just feel that energy? Like
it's most nights, and there are, the amazing thing about classical music is that it is I don't exaggerate when I say it's a kind of artistic universe. There's something for everyone. There's 500 years of music. There's 3-minute little pieces which are super tuneful. I could name you 10 off the top of my head. They're in films that people say, oh, I didn't realize that was by Shostakovich. I didn't realize that was by Mozart. I didn't realize that was by Beethoven. I love that tune. Then there are pieces that are 20 minutes long that are just basically dances, contemporary 20th century, and then there's these symphonies that go on for 80 minutes, operas that go on for 4 hours. There's the equivalent of a 4-minute clip from Stephen Colbert, or there's the equivalent of a Netflix series, or there's equivalent of whatever it's got all of that in it.
The thing is that people need to be introduced to it, right? People will watch the Stephen Colbert for 4 minutes, right? Yeah. But then they're like, do I want to have this for this long? How do you introduce people to this kind of music, or what do you want them to take out of it if they haven't been exposed? If we're having someone to come to the NAC and say, just try this out, right, what should they be in that seat looking for, or trying to take in, or looking at?
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons I try to, as much as possible, and I enjoy very much speaking a little bit off the top of the concert, just to give a bit of introduction. Because, I mentioned cricket a little earlier, and when you're not in England, India, Australia, New Zealand, a couple of other places, people have this sort of funny smile when you mention the word cricket, because they all think it's funny and they don't really get what's going on there, which is fine. But
it can, and that the games can go on for days,
right? Exactly.
And wearing their white, yeah.
But it could be, we could substitute cricket for any sport that you personally don't know or play or anything. As soon as you have a little bit of a connection, whether it's to a player where you hear their backstory, or maybe just a couple of the fundamental rules are explained, or someone explains to you what's so particularly challenging about something, then you have a new set of parameters with which to judge and enjoy, and you can start to build on that seed. And in music, it's no different. So if you just to go back to what you were saying about, do I have those experiences where I think this is incredible on stage, and shared experiences with the orchestra and the audience. There are pieces, some of my favorite pieces that we've done recently by a guy called Richard Strauss, who was a German composer, and he wrote when he was very young. And this is the other thing to remember: a lot of the greatest pieces ever written in classical music were written by men and women who were under the age of 40, most of it. And anyway, he wrote this piece called Death and Transfiguration, which is 20 minutes long. At the beginning, you hear in the orchestra the sound of a slow heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. That's how the piece starts. Boom, boom, boom. And for the first 6 or 7 minutes, you hear these little wisps of melodies. It's this sort of reminiscence. You're taken into this very calm, dark room with a sort of single candle lit. You can really see it happening in front of your eyes. And this is old man on the edge of death. And he's attacked by fever. Then there's this kind of brutal 45-second interjection with the full orchestra. And then he settles into this reminiscence of his life. And it goes through, in the next 5, 6, 7 minutes, it goes through his memories of being a young boy. And you hear these beautiful innocent tunes and his mother. And then it goes into him being a young teenager, and then feeling this sort of power in his body and his personality coming to the fore, falling in love the first time, the second time, and there are these amazing high points, very romantic music. And at the end of this sort of life sequence, there's an attack of fever again, and he falls back into his bed, and you hear this rhythm from the beginning, his heartbeat. And then there's the final attack, and he passes away. And for the last few minutes of the piece, some of the most extraordinary music ever written, you hear his soul rise up to heaven, and you hear this moment where he stands in front of the gates of heaven, and the gates open, and there's just pure love that comes out. And it's not just a transfiguration of his soul, but the themes that you'd heard earlier in the piece of his youth and of his first loves, they're transfigured into an all-encompassing love. Now that piece is extraordinary. If I were to tell the audience what I just said, suddenly, these 20 minutes
right.
make complete sense.
Right now, I'm like, I want to listen to this now, and I don't know if I would have understood that. So
no, if you'd gone in and you'd seen the name of Death and Transfiguration and you'd listened to those 22 minutes, there may have been moments that you thought that's nice, or you might have listened to the beginning, bomb, 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 and you thought it's kind of weird beginning to a piece. What is this? Like this, I don't get what's going on. But if you know it's a heartbeat, if you know that this is happening, then suddenly you can appreciate how he, the composer, takes this story that I've outlined, and he adds this other layer, which goes from our brains, me telling you a story, straight, uninhibited, into the heart. And performing, and there are so many pieces like that, but performing pieces like that with a great orchestra like ours here, for an audience, is one of the most extraordinary experiences, because you not only well, first and foremost, you sense this connection that we all have that is so fundamental in life experience. We all experience these things. And music can say it in a way that is so truthful, and everybody understands and everybody shares, but there are no words involved. And it's that fundamental experience of life, you know? And that's why it's so international as well.
Right. But you've just made me right now want to go get a ticket and go watch this.
Come along.
You know, I think when you and people just, they call you like this leader, like there's an energy to you that's about educating, and that's about kind of recreating this idea of bringing different audiences in. And are you looking to do that? I mean, you have the ability to do so, and you've made some great changes at the National Arts Center. Is this something that you hope more people in your position are able to do, so that it's exposed to so many more people, that we have an appreciation that you're not getting the typical people off the street that already know it but are coming to learn more about it and be exposed?
Absolutely. And yes, you know, yes, it's the word education is useful, and in terms of real education, we do a lot with young people and trying to get music into their lives. But I think maybe in this context, sort of appreciation is what I'm trying to, or understanding, because it drives me nuts as someone who's in this world, who loves it, and I know how honest these composers are. These are amazing men and women who are super. You know, this idea that it's kind of wigs and very austere. None of these composers are like that.
But that's all we know, right? And I mean, and I know you have this passion for the work of Beethoven, and there's the Beethoven Festival that we'll talk about. But we do. I mean, I do. I picture them. I can't relate to what Mozart. The photos that I've seen of sitting by a piano. But when you talk about you understanding and having this dialogue with current possible composers, that you understand these stories that are happening. Yeah, it puts everything in such a different light.
But these longer forms of pieces, and even the short ones sometimes. But if you're saying to someone, listen to a 20-minute piece, or listen to a 30-minute piece, or a 40-minute piece, or an hour, or I don't know why anyone thinks that someone should just get it, in inverted commas, musicians included. It's everyone, musicians included, need a helping hand, and that's not because the thing itself is inaccessible. It's because it's got so much depth and breadth that sometimes it just needs talking about beforehand. It needs a little bit of sort of preparing the ground, because it is non-verbal. You're not going to have in a symphony piece the musician standing up in the middle saying, well, this is happening now, this is happening now. It's non-verbal. It's about a pure emotion. So sometimes if there is a story, if there is a narrative, if there are things to look out for, if there are Even knowing, okay, how many movements are there? When should I clap? Is there a good or is there a right or wrong moment to clap? I know that sounds like such a simple thing, but a lot
But
of
it's
people
not.
think about it, and
they're intimidated,
yeah,
and they'd rather.
yeah, exactly. And I hate that idea. The idea that someone should be anything other than sort of excited to be in the hall and feel like they can be who they are and enjoy the experience. That drives me nuts. And but I get why it happens. I get why it happens. And part of what I enjoy about our modern world, people like you, this ability now to talk in forums like this with so many people listening, who where I can say, listen, come to the hall. I'm going to try and do what I can on stage to open the experience up for you, and I can tell you that these works, if you let them into your lives, and if you give me and them, the works, the opportunity to speak to you, which will sometimes take investment, like a great book. It sometimes takes investment of your own time just to sort of get into it, but they'll feed you for the rest of your lives. They're magnificent, enduring, sort of human stories.
Has there been a piece that's made you like that you cry, that you laugh, that you?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, there's so many come to mind. The end of, or one of my favorite moments of music, and for many classical musicians, is the end of the opera Tristan and Isolde, which is a very long and amazing story about a Celtic princess, and and at the end, she dies because the man she loves has passed away, and she comes back too late to tell him that she loves him. And in 8 or 9 minutes of the most stunning music ever written, she gives up her soul. She says, "I love you so much. I have to be with you so much. I'm gonna go too." She doesn't commit suicide. It just happens. She just goes. I mean, of course, it's far fetched.
Yeah.
But in combination with the music, it is a kind of expression of that ultimate romantic love that I could think of very few things that match it. The climax of Mahler's Second Symphony, it's a behemoth of a work, a very, very big work, but it also has a moment of transcendence that is difficult to compare with anything in artistic output anywhere. I could imagine putting together, a short list of things and giving people a short entree into what's happening at this point, what the story is, and their minds would be. I can think of no one who wouldn't be affected.
Yeah.
By it. I can think of no one,
And you're trying to do that right now, just because I'm looking at the time and getting you're doing that right now with this Beethoven festival, and you get into the point where you explain, and I think for you to understand what a composer must feel and the senses of going deaf while composing and writing, and how music lives in our heads, right, without actually having to hear it. Was this something like an idea or something that you've wanted to do, of bringing these series, of bringing this education and enjoyment to people? Yeah,
well, we've had a big renovation of the NEC the last couple of years. The outside has been rejuvenated, and during this summer, there have been works going on inside, so production renewal. Southern Hall has got a new shell on stage, so we sit inside a construction that's put there every time we have a concert, the shell, and we have this beautiful new shell coming, which will really transform the acoustic and the experience of listening to the orchestra. We knew this was going to be happening at the beginning of the season, and I thought, what would be a great way to compare the old and the new? And we perform a lot of contemporary music, and I thought that could be nice, but how can you, if you've never heard a piece before, how can you compare what it used to sound like in the hall to what it sounds like now? And of course, one of the core cycles for any orchestral musician and conductor is the Beethoven symphonies. And they've been performed a lot here over the years, and I thought, well, that could be perfect. But also I said, of course, one of the core cycles for musicians and conductors is the Beethoven symphonies. That is something I want to get into too, because it's a bit like saying, oh yeah, Shakespeare's plays, they're great. A lot of people would, they know that that's what they're supposed to say.
Right.
Oh, they're great. Yeah, plays, Shakespeare. Symphonies, Beethoven. Everyone like knows that Beethoven wrote great symphonies, but why? And that question really interests me as well, because we all like, yeah, Beethoven, symphonies, Shakespeare, plays. But it's very interesting to get into why are they important? Why are they great? Why were they formative? What was it about that cycle of 9 pieces, all of them under an hour, quite a lot of them under half an hour long? How can that have been so important? And so it's going to be experience of the new shell, the new acoustic, hearing our orchestra in a rejuvenated space, but also getting into that question. So how is it that between the first and ninth symphonies he created a canon of works that kind of changed music forever, but also changed the way music relates to society? Because he, in the course of those symphonies, was the first musician to genuinely make political and societal points in music. How did he do that? How do you do that in abstract music? How did he change like the technical side, the harmonic side? How did he open up the world for people like Wagner and Mendelssohn and even pop musicians later on? How did all of that happen? That's something I want to explore in the series, and there are answers to that. There are also open questions, things that we can discuss, but at the core are these 9 amazing works performed by the National Arts Centre Orchestra, which is, and I say this as their music director, but I also said this years before I was their music director when I was coming as a guest conductor, is one of the finest orchestras in the world that we have in the city, without question. And some of the finest musicians in the world sitting in that orchestra. And, that's an opportunity to relish in a short period of time. It's a kind of bucket list thing. You just hear all the symphonies done.
Right, and maybe we take advantage of the fact that we have the National Arts Center here in the city, and people don't quite understand just the depth of the talent.
Yeah.
Is it nice to be recognized worldwide, that people recognize it or see it or know what's offered here?
Absolutely, but it's also part of our, it's a very important part of our strategy in the coming years. Is, if you will, getting the good news out there to the world. We're recording a lot at the moment. We're putting together many albums where we do one of 2 things. First of all, we record the new Canadian works that we've been commissioning, some of which are fantastic, absolutely fantastic, getting them out into the world, but also recording the core classical repertoire so that people in Germany and France, wherever, they can hear the level of this orchestra in greater depth and detail than they ever have before. Plus, we're going to be touring, so we're doing a big Europe tour.
Yeah, I know. The 2019, there's a lot going on for the 50th anniversary of the orchestra. Now, Pincus, pretty, I want to say, allowed us to and put this orchestra on the map. I mean, there was this field, there was this name that brought us there. Do you find that you have made it, though, in this transition, you've made it your own as well? Like there's your mark that you're leaving and that you've established to kind of recreate it into a, and I don't want to say younger, but it's just been exposed on a different platform.
Yeah, we spent the early part of the interview talking about youth and childhood and formative years. In an orchestra's history, every music director, every musician who's in the orchestra leaves their mark. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. I have been so fortunate to follow in Pinchas Zukerman's footsteps. He hired such wonderful musicians to this orchestra. He instilled such a cultivated sense of sound. These are things, they're the foundations, and it would be the same for a sports team or a managerial team. They're the foundations on which you depend as a conductor, this integrity. And I arrived and I found it there. So I was given the greatest gift by him, if you will. And yes, I believe, though, also at the same time, that over the last few years, precisely because of these deep and true foundations that he laid, that I've had the freedom also to really work with the orchestra and experiment, try out new things, to broaden our horizons in different directions, and also because I'm just a different personality to him. We're trying to keep all of the great things that he achieved, this high-level education for international young soloists and so on and so forth, with things that I love doing as well, going into schools where they don't have any music at all, and just trying to bring music into their lives. And
you've got the kid orchestra too, right?
Yeah.
You're one of the, your name is attached to it, right?
Yeah. Orchestra, I'm an ambassador for them, and that's an amazing initiative in this city. The orchestra helps to bring music into the lives of kids who otherwise wouldn't have it, but not just because music is great, but more importantly because music, as we were talking about earlier, is a way to help instill communication, empathy, discipline, to get young people working and communicating together in groups that might not have otherwise occurred, and to bring things into their lives that are incredibly valuable, skills that are deeply transferable. In a context which is fun and challenging for them, and so I'm very proud to be an ambassador with them too. And yes, we're trying so hard to bring classical music in one way or another. And I say classical music, what I mean is music, because also we do a lot of workshops and have done a lot of workshops around the country on our tours, where it's not about do you want to play Mozart?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm glad if they do, but also, do you write a song, rap, hit whatever you want? What is your language? And
Have you done that? Have you written?
have I written?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I used to a lot
Yeah.
when I was a kid. Yeah.
What were you writing? Like,
Oh, I wrote all different things. I mean, I wrote classical music,
Mhm.
and I enjoyed writing stuff. I mean, you have to when you're a young musician do exercise where you do pastiche and stuff. But I used to I write sort of stuff for symphony. It was probably absolutely awful, but I wrote it. I wrote my novel.
did you ever write anything for Zoe?
I've written her little sort of silly songs over the years. Yeah,
But they're silly.
they're fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
we just we like that. We were joking the other day because both of us got particularly tanned when we were away. Where were we? Down. It was here in Ontario. We were near Stratford, and it was a beautiful. The summer's been incredible. We got both particularly kind of orangey tanned, and Zoe started singing the Oompa Loompa song. I don't know if you know that from. Is it the Wizard of Oz or no? It's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I hadn't heard that song since I was about 5, and so sometimes I write little songs that sound a bit like the Oompa Loompa song because it makes us smile or laugh, those kind of. But no, I digress. I'm not a composer. I'm not a songwriter. I do things like that for fun. But there is so much creative capacity in young people. I mean, it's endless. And
do you love seeing that? Like, do you love seeing
love
a
it.
child's?
I love it. And we did a project a couple of years ago based on a poem by Rita Joe, the indigenous poet from Eskasoni, amazing woman, and it was called I Lost My Talk. It's one of her poems. It was a very serious piece about her experience at a residential school, and it was a big production that we did here and toured around the country. But we also then did a thing called the Rita Joe Song Project, where we reached out to indigenous communities, and we said to them, look, if you were writing a poem about your experiences, about your I Lost My Talk, what would it be? And please write us a song, submit them. And we had so many amazing songs and videos submitted by school, classes and stuff. And that's just a small example of so much that's going on around the country that we're trying to support and also bring to life, where you see this talent that is there. It's in everybody. I mean, I always say, when people say I haven't got a good ear, I say, well, if your best friend calls and says hello, not only do you immediately know that it's your best friend at the end of the phone, you know what their mood is, how long they're probably going to want to talk to you for, how you should continue the conversation. That's just using your ear. Everybody has very, very good ears, and everybody also has a capacity for creativity. And sorry, I'm witching.
I know, but I love that. I love that analogy, though. Like, that's so.
People have great ears, and it's just a question of tapping into it, and
If you had a young musician standing in front of you who is 13 years old and who's been playing that violin or that cello or that piano, and is kind of on the brink of, where do I go from here? What do you say to them?
Oh, that's a big one. I guess the first thing I say is, do you love this? Do you find it rewarding when you play the instrument? Is this something that is part of who you are? Putting aside whether you sometimes find it arduous to practice or whether you don't know if you can make a career, that would be the first question. And if the answer to that is yes, I love this, then I would investigate how I could help.
And is it like a team? I mean, you've got 100,000 kids playing hockey, and 10 of them are going to make the NHL, right? Yeah. At what point do you see that in your role as you're good, you're really good.
Yeah.
You're just not. You're not going to make the orchestra. You're not going to make the team. Like,
Yeah.
is that on you? Is that on?
Well, that's.
Who?
I mean, I have to say, I'm very grateful that I'm rarely in that position, and it's one of, I think, the greatest challenges that educators face. Is that coming to that point? Is saying I'm going to educate, but I also have to give life advice here. And I'm so glad I don't have to say that to a young person. Either way, saying, look, this is good. You're going to make a career of this. That's also hugely risky. But then saying, I don't think this is your thing. Who are you to stop someone going into that profession? At the same time, you need music, sports. If you haven't got what it takes, it's hard. It's hard then to make ends meet.
And which I think is why this is so unique and so special, that you're in this world that you're working with the cream of the crop, right? You have been, and I think it's lucky, and we're very fortunate to be able to have it here. We've been talking about this Beethoven series and your work and the exposure, and so this is great because this is the first time I have like a giveaway that we can do here on the podcast, which is very fun. And so I'm going to be posting the picture of us. Like, this is going to go. When people are listening to it, it means it's live. But if you're going to head to my Instagram, I want you to be able to see the picture of us.
Yep.
Because we're going to be like, oh my God, we got tickets to give away. And then you're going to kind of tag the friend that you want to be able to take opening night. Yep. And this is for the Beethoven Festival. It's Thursday, September 13th. There's wonderful workshops and talks that you're going to be doing. And then, of course, there's the big show at 8 o'clock in Southam Hall. And you have a chance to be able to go. We're going to give away 2 tickets. So follow me on Instagram. Be looking at and following the NAC. Tag a person that you want to be able to take with you. And then we're going to draw for that from the names that are listed. And the NAC's got 2 tickets to be able to give. So I'm very excited. It's the first time we're going to be doing that. I'm really excited for you and Zoe.
Thank you.
You have to give me like 30 seconds. And they're trying to wrap me up here. But I want to know what it was like for you at this young age to be able to be looking out into your orchestra and seeing this young cellist sitting there, because Zoe played the cello, right?
She did.
Yeah.
Oh, she was in the National Youth Orchestra in Great
That's where
Britain.
you met. That's where you met, isn't it?
I was assistant conductor. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like? I mean, because you're looking out as you've mentioned, right? You're looking out on any given day at 70 musicians to be able to look over at this young girl and kind of go, I think this is the love of my life sitting over here.
Yeah. Well, she's very beautiful, and there was just always something there from the beginning. And it's something I'm particularly thinking about now as the baby's coming, that, looking back on those first moments when you meet someone, the idea that a few years later you're going to have a child together, you're going to be married is really quite extraordinary. But I'm a very lucky man, I can tell you that. It's
interesting because she said, I remember vividly, because, I mean, for her, she had played and grown up in that, in that environment. And her saying right now, there's enough. You create enough music for the both of them. For the both of you. And that by where you are in your life, just having you there was enough to be able to expose the 2 of you to this music that she didn't need to be following and playing and continuing also. That it wouldn't have worked that way.
No, it may have done, but I think this is preferable. Yeah.
She gets to travel.
Yeah.
And so what happens? The baby boy's due in a couple weeks. You've made Ottawa home, and you wanted the baby born here in Canada.
Yeah.
And then have you guys thought about it at traveling with baby?
We're planning to travel with him as much as possible. Now, in the first year, if he travels with me, then we'll go around the world at least once, because I've got a tour to Australia. We have the Europe tour. We'll be back and forth to Canada. So he'll be a very well-traveled young man. Yeah.
That's amazing. I hope people follow you also.
Yeah.
I think I've loved the pictures of you in different parts of the world, and you're very good at sharing it and kind of giving us a feel of what that experience is like. So if you haven't already and you're listening to this, to follow Alexander on Instagram as well, you'll get a good sense of kind of the movement of life.
Back behind the scenes.
If you're going to get into the car right now and you turn on the music, what's playing on your car?
Probably Beethoven right now, because but it could be anything.
Is there top 40? Does top 40 make it in?
Absolutely.
Top 40 will make it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, love ballads.
Love
ballads. It's
all,
like you've got everything covered.
You got everything. I love all music. I really do, and I listen to everything. So, but right now it's Beethoven because I'm preparing.
Yeah, so it's just that's the mindset that you're in.
Yeah.
Well, I hope people take advantage of understanding a little bit more when they're listening to something. I know now I want to be able to almost Google if I'm about to listen to a piece.
Yeah.
Will that information be available? I mean, you've made it accessible and want to be able to share. Can most people find that information?
I really need to go to the loo for the last 25 minutes. Could I just, do you mind? That's why I'm like moving around. Do you mind? I'm so sorry.
I warned you. I warned you.
Can we cut back in there? Do you mind if I go?
We can just go. I'm just gonna wrap it. I'm gonna
go like
open the door. I'm gonna open the door.
I go and come straight back. I'm so sorry.
We're gonna wrap.
Look, I gotta come straight back because we have to
I hope.
finish
Yeah,
off.
You have to watch this
We
if
have
you
to
haven't.
do a finish off. Like, we'll have to do a little. Where is it? I'm so sorry, but I'd be like, for 25 minutes, I'd be like, ah.
I did notice some sort of. I did. I was like, it's not that I watched. It's not because of the time.
Okay, that was funny. I'm so sorry.
Oh my god! You know what is funny? It's like we were just saying. Like I did start to see you squirm a bit, and then I was like, I'm like, and then Alvin's like, he didn't even touch his water.
Yeah. No, it's the coffee because I already had like 2 before I came.
Okay.
Oh my god!
I'm
Yeah.
so sorry.
Alex is back from his bathroom break. I should have known as he was squirming in the chair. But I was just saying, you've given us such a great outlook on understanding when we're listening to something, how we can make the most and take the most out of it. Is it offered typically, or is this your style, or how do people find more information so that they can enjoy more if they're exposing themselves to it?
It's something we try to do a lot. I often speak at the top of concerts about what's coming up. But we also have designated formats, or designated concerts, like our Casual Friday concerts, which interestingly are not always on Fridays. So you need to check that. But it's called Casual Friday. And there we offer lots of different things, but at the core of it will often be a slight deconstruction of what's going on stage. It could be about the composer, it could be about the piece, the background, or the experience of being on stage, or a particular theme. But they're hosted often by a guest host, sometimes by me, sometimes the musicians are speaking. And it's a great way to get inside the workings of a piece in as far as I'm concerned, a very kind of accessible way for both older people and younger people. So Casual Fridays.
Okay, Casual Fridays 1. You're not casual on stage. Usually you're in a tux.
Right. Although that's changing this season.
Really?
So we've overhauled what we look like on stage. We're going to be wearing. Sorry, I'm normally in tails. We are going to be in tuxes, but it's going to be a bit more kind of like a groovy, loungy look.
Huh. See?
Smart,
Kind of
but very 21st century.
I like it. It's a shift. It's a change.
Yeah.
And my last question is, are you exhausted? Like, are you physically tired after a performance? Like, I would think the musicians are.
Yeah.
Are you?
No, it's rare that I'm physically tired. And also it's rare that the musicians are truly kind of exhausted. It's a workout, but it's something that we train a lot for.
It's the preparation.
Yeah, and I normally
and nothing with the wrist. Is there ever
touch wood?
No, yeah.
Touch wood. I'm good, but it is something I need to think about. I mean, I've had periods over the last few years, where I'll be changing time zone a lot, conducting a lot, sitting in planes a lot, not sleeping very much, and your body starts to do weird things. I don't need to tell you so many years of getting up early, and your body and your mind are very related. If you're carrying stress, I know suddenly the posture.
Suddenly we both changed our postures.
But I've noticed a lot that when my mind is carrying stress, or I have stress and I'm not sleeping enough, it suddenly starts to manifest itself in bits of my body, and that'll be my neck and my shoulders and my back. But because they're so fundamental to what I do, I had to find ways to ameliorate that. Exercise is great. I mean, I exercise a lot and I love it, and I find it's beneficial both physically but also mentally. I feel so much better. That's not new information for anyone, but yeah, I find balancing work. It always seems easier in theory than in practice. We have a strange way of working in my profession. I know where I'm going to be on, let's say, November 3rd, 2020. I know that now. We're booked.
I don't know where I am tomorrow.
We're booked 2.5 years out, 3 years out sometimes. So, as the dates start to come in and you're filling your diary, I find it always easy to start with by saying, well, I'm going to keep those 2 weeks free because I know I'm going to have to study, and I'd like to just also, be calm for a bit. I can keep those 2 weeks free, and that'll be free, and that's great. And this season looks great. I'm doing all the work I want to do, and there's nice free time, because the time is never really free, because you've got to study and prepare. And then little things come in that you don't want to say no to because they just seem enticing, and you realize actually that's a day's travel, and then it fills up and you wonder why you're tired. But that's...
As he's saying this, I'm thinking, you are about to be sleep deprived.
I know.
You are about to have a brand new baby. I'm like,
know.
let's talk about this in 6 months from now.
I know.
And I love it now. And now that he's gone to the bathroom, you can sit and talk for a while. But we're going to wrap things up. Alexander, so great to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to remind people too, I mean, Zoe was on, she has a remarkable story as well. This is the best part about podcasts, as I'm learning. People can listen to one and then go back and listen to others and to be able to kind of follow along in these storylines. If you have an opportunity, please subscribe, please like, recommend, and also go back and take a look at some of the other stories and some of the other guests that we've had on. It's really been a ton of fun. And that's it. That's episode 29 of Living Your Life with Leanne Lang. Have an awesome day. Great to have you. Start following, and it's been a pleasure. This is great. I can't wait to go and take in something at the NAC now.
Good.
Very different perspective. It's
See
wonderful.
you there. Thank you, Leanne. That was lovely.